You're about to hear 3 true creepy stories from tow truck drivers. Story 1. The call that came in twice. Dennis had been driving a tow truck for 11 years, mostly nights. He liked nights, less traffic, better pay, and a kind of quiet on the road that he had come to prefer over the chaos of daytime calls. There was a rhythm to night work that he'd grown to trust. The highway emptied out after midnight, and what was left on it tended to be predictable. Truckers running freight. The occasional drunk driver he'd learned to spot from a distance by the way their headlights wandered. He worked for a small independent company that covered a wide stretch of rural highway. The kind of route where a breakdown could mean waiting an hour or more for help, and where cell service dropped out completely in 3 or 4 specific low valleys along the way. He knew those dead zones by heart. Everyone who worked that route did. You learned them the way you learned potholes and blind curves, filed away as simple, unremarkable facts of the job, no different from knowing which gas stations closed early or which diner still served breakfast at 3 in the morning. The valley around mile marker 61 was the worst of them. A long stretch where the terrain dipped low enough that towers on either side lost the signal completely for almost 3 miles. This happened on a Thursday in late October. It was a cold, clear night, the kind where sound carried further than it should, where you could hear a truck downshifting on the grade a full mile before it came into view. Dispatch radioed him a call around 11. Stranded vehicle, broken down on the shoulder about 20 miles out, mile marker 61. Female caller, sounded calm, said her car had simply stopped and wouldn't restart. No hazards mentioned, no injuries, just a straightforward mechanical breakdown, the kind of call Dennis had answered hundreds of times before without a second thought. Dennis took the call and started driving, running through the standard mental checklist he always ran through on the way. Jump box charged, tow straps in good condition, enough fuel to make the round trip without needing to stop. Mile marker 61 sat right in the middle of the worst dead zone on the route. He knew that as soon as dispatch gave him the location, it didn't concern him particularly. It just meant he'd be out of radio contact for the last 10 minutes of the drive, same as always out there. He got to the location at 11:30. No car. Empty shoulder, empty road in both directions as far as his headlights reached. He sat there for a moment, running the mile marker back through his head, second-guessing whether he'd misread the number dispatch had given him. He radioed dispatch to confirm the location, but of course the radio was dead out there, same as it always was. Nothing but static and the faint hiss of an open channel with no one on the other end. He waited a few minutes, then drove another half-mile in each direction, checking. Headlights, sweeping the tree line on either side. Nothing. He came back to mile marker 61 and waited there for a while longer, engine idling, watching both directions. The road was completely still. No other traffic passed the entire time he sat there. After about 15 minutes, he decided the caller must have gotten a ride from someone else, or the car had somehow restarted, and he started heading back towards cell coverage to call it in and close out the job. He got back into range about 10 minutes later, the bars on his phone climbing back up one at a time as he cleared the valley. His phone buzzed almost immediately with 3 missed calls from dispatch, all within the last 20 minutes, along with a voicemail he hadn't heard come through. He called back immediately, already feeling a strange unease settle into his chest before he even knew why. Dispatch told him the same caller had called again, 12 minutes ago, still saying she was stranded at mile marker 61, sounding confused and slightly frustrated about why nobody had come yet. Dennis pulled the truck over to the shoulder and sat there for a second with the phone against his ear, trying to make the pieces fit together in a way that made any kind of sense. He'd been sitting right at that mile marker for 15 minutes with no cell signal of his own, and no way for her to have called anyone, let alone dispatch specifically, from that exact location. Dispatch said the call had come through clearly, no static, no dropped signal, nothing to suggest a poor connection of any kind. The dispatcher had spoken to her for almost 2 minutes, taken down the same details as the first call, and confirmed a truck was already en route. Dennis asked what time exactly that second call had come in. Dispatch checked the log and read him the timestamp. It was almost exactly the midpoint of the 15 minutes he'd spent parked at that mile marker, with 0 bars on his phone. Dennis turned around and drove back out. He got to mile marker 61 again just before midnight, still empty. He sat there for a long moment before he noticed something he hadn't clocked the first time. A dirt turnout, mostly overgrown, about 30 yards past the mile marker sign, easy to miss unless you were looking for it. He drove up to it slowly, headlights sweeping across the overgrown brush at the turnout's edge. Then he saw it, a car, older sedan, parked at an angle that suggested it hadn't pulled in carefully, more like it had drifted to a stop rather than been steered. Lights off, engine off. Nothing about it looked violent or dramatic, which somehow made it worse. He got out and approached with his flashlight, beam cutting through the dark toward the driver's side window. Nobody in the driver's seat. He circled to check the other windows. Nobody in the car at all. He checked the doors, unlocked. He checked the ignition, keys still in it, like the driver had simply stepped away for a moment and never come back. On the passenger seat was a phone, screen cracked in one corner, battery at 4%, according to the display when he picked it up. No case, no lock screen. He hesitated for a second before checking the call log, some instinct telling him it mattered, the way you sometimes know a piece of information is going to change things before you've even read it. There were 2 outgoing calls listed to a number he recognized immediately as the dispatch line, a number he'd dialed himself more times than he could count over 11 years. One at 11:15, one at 11:42. Both calls, according to the log, had connected and lasted over a minute each. Dennis stood there in the cold with that phone in his hand for a long time, the 4% battery indicator glowing faintly in the dark, watching it as though it might do something else while he held it. He had been parked less than 100 feet from that turnout for almost 15 minutes between those 2 calls, sitting in a dead zone with no signal of his own, and somehow this phone had made 2 separate connected calls to dispatch from the exact same dead zone. He called it in. Police were dispatched, arriving within 40 minutes, and setting up floodlights around the turnout that turned the dark clearing into something clinical and stark. They processed the scene, ran the plate, ran the phone. The car belonged to a woman named Patricia, 44 years old, reported missing by her sister 2 days earlier after she failed to show up for a family dinner. She had last been seen leaving her workplace on the Tuesday evening, driving this same stretch of highway toward her home, 40 miles further on. Her disappearance had not yet been connected to this stretch of road, since nobody had known to look here, until Dennis found her car, sitting in a turnout he'd nearly missed entirely. There was no sign of Patricia anywhere in the surrounding area despite an extensive search over the following days. No blood, no struggle, nothing beyond the car itself and the cracked phone with 2 calls to dispatch that shouldn't have been able to connect from where it was sitting. The investigating officer, a heavyset man named Garrett who had clearly worked more than his share of difficult cases, told Dennis off the record, after the official statements had all been taken, that the dispatch recordings had been pulled and reviewed. Both calls featured a woman's voice, calm, giving the same information each time. Stranded at mile marker 61, car won't start. The voice on both recordings was confirmed, through comparison with a home video her sister provided, to be Patricia's voice beyond any reasonable doubt. Same cadence, same slight rasp on certain vowels that her sister said had been there since childhood. Dennis asked the officer the obvious question. If she made those calls, where was she? The officer didn't have an answer. He told Dennis, quietly, glancing back toward the other officers still working the scene before he continued, that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened on that stretch of highway. He said there'd been at least 2 other cases over the years involving calls or messages that came from that same dead zone under circumstances that never fully added up. He wouldn't elaborate further, no matter how directly Dennis asked. Dennis pressed him once, gently, about what he meant by cases that never fully added up. The officer looked at him for a long moment before answering. He said there'd been at least 1 other case on that same stretch of road, years back, that never fully added up either. A call, a voice, a location that shouldn't have made sense. He wouldn't go into detail. He said he didn't have an explanation for any of it. He said in 15 years on the force, That stretch of highway was the only place that had ever genuinely unsettled him. Patricia was never found. Dennis still drives that route. He never requested a transfer, never asked to be reassigned, though several co-workers offered to trade shifts with him after they heard what happened. He told me he takes calls to mile marker 61 differently now. He calls dispatch back before he leaves, confirms the details twice, and he doesn't get out of his truck at that turnout unless he absolutely has to. He said the thing that stays with him isn't the missing woman, as terrible as that is. It's the timing of it. 2 calls made from a dead zone, both times while he was sitting less than 100 feet away, in the exact same dead zone with no signal at all. He has run the math on it more times than he'd like to admit, turning the numbers over on quiet nights when the highway is empty, and his mind drifts back to it. The odds of a phone connecting a call from a spot with no coverage, not once but twice, both times while he happened to be parked nearby in that same dead spot, like whatever made those calls understood exactly when he'd be close enough to almost catch it, and made sure to call anyway. Story 2. The Repo on Willow Street. Marcus had been doing repo work for 8 years. He'd been spat at, cursed out, once had a man come at him with a golf club. He'd learned to read a driveway the way some people read a room, sensing trouble before it fully arrived. This job was different from the start, though he wouldn't fully understand how different until much later. The vehicle was a work truck registered to a man named Curtis, 6 months behind on payments with no response to any collection attempts. The address was a house on Willow Street, a quiet residential block in an older part of town. Marcus's first attempt was on a Tuesday night, around 1 in the morning. He pulled up slowly, lights off, the way he always approached a repo, coasting the last stretch on momentum alone to avoid the engine noise carrying. The truck was there, parked in the driveway, exactly where the file said it would be. As he got closer, he noticed the house itself. 2-story, pale blue siding, the kind of house that looked exactly like every third house on the street. Dark, no lights on anywhere, nothing that suggested anyone was home or awake. He got out, hooked the vehicle efficiently, the way 8 years of practice had trained him to do, working the chains and the winch with the kind of muscle memory that let his eyes stay on the house the entire time. Back in his cab within 4 minutes. As he was pulling away, he glanced at the house one more time out of habit, the way he always did to make sure nobody was chasing after the truck on foot. A light had come on, upstairs window, facing the street. A figure was standing at the window, watching him. He couldn't make out details at that distance, and in that light, just a shape, backlit, motionless, tall, he thought, though it was hard to be certain through the glass in the distance. He drove off without incident. The repo went through cleanly. He filed his report, made a small mental note about the light, and moved on to his next job without thinking much more about it. Owners watched from windows sometimes. It wasn't unusual. 3 weeks later, dispatch flagged him for a follow-up. The same address, Willow Street. Curtis had apparently gotten the truck back somehow, brought his payments partially current, then fallen behind again, almost immediately. The file was reopened, and Marcus was assigned to it again, which wasn't unusual in itself. Some debtors cycled through this pattern for years. Second attempt, another Tuesday night, similar time. The truck was there again, same spot in the driveway. This time, as Marcus approached, something felt different. He couldn't articulate exactly what, just a wrongness to the quiet of the house that he hadn't registered the first time. The kind of silence that felt occupied rather than empty, though he couldn't have explained the distinction to anyone who asked. He hooked the vehicle again, same efficient process, working quickly but carefully, and was pulling away when he glanced at the upstairs window, out of the same habit as before. The light was already on this time, not coming on as he left, already on. Had been on, he realized, this entire time, though he hadn't noticed it when he first pulled up. The figure was already at the window too, watching him, as if it had been standing there before he ever arrived on the street. Marcus drove away faster than he needed to, checking his mirrors more than usual on the drive back to the yard. He mentioned it to a coworker the next day, half joking about the guy on Willow Street who apparently just liked watching his truck get repossessed from an upstairs window at 1 a.m. The co-worker, an older repo driver named Sal, went quiet for a second. Sal asked him to describe the house more specifically, setting down his coffee like the answer actually mattered to him. Marcus did. 2-story, pale blue siding, detached garage, upstairs window on the left side facing the street, the one that had lit up both times he'd been there. Sal said he'd had that address before, years earlier, back when he was doing repo work full-time instead of the occasional fill-in shift he picked up now. A different vehicle, a different debtor entirely, nothing that connected the two files as far as he could tell, but he said he remembered the house clearly because of the exact same detail. A light coming on upstairs as he pulled away, a figure watching from the window that hadn't been there when he first arrived. Marcus asked if it had been the same person. Sal said no, different name entirely on the file back then, a woman's name, if he remembered right, though he couldn't be certain after all this time. He said as far as he knew, the house had changed owners, at least once, between his repo and this one. Marcus asked how many years ago that had been. Sal thought about it, said it had to be at least 6 years, maybe closer to 7. Marcus filed that away and didn't think much more about it until his third visit to Willow Street. Curtis, it turned out, was a repeat offender when it came to payments. 6 weeks after Marcus's second repo, dispatch flagged the file a third time. By this point, Marcus had developed a genuine unease about the address that he couldn't fully justify to himself. He requested a partner for this one, which was unusual for a routine repo, but his supervisor didn't ask questions and paired him with a younger driver named Theo. Third visit, same time, same routine. The truck was there. Marcus hooked it while Theo waited in the second vehicle, watching the street. As Marcus finished and climbed back into his cab, Theo radioed him. He said the upstairs light had just come on. Marcus told him that was normal, don't worry about it, they were leaving anyway. Theo said no, he needed to see this. Marcus looked. The figure was at the window again, but this time, for the first time across 3 visits, it did something different. It raised one hand, pressed it flat against the glass, palm open, fingers spread. Then, slowly, it began to wave, not a casual wave, a deliberate, unhurried motion, back and forth, the kind of wave you gave someone you recognized from a distance and wanted to make sure had seen you too. Marcus and Theo left immediately, the flatbed's engine louder than either of them wanted it to be as they pulled away from the curb. Neither of them said much on the drive back. Theo kept glancing at the side mirror the entire way, though neither of them said what he was checking for. Marcus filed his report and requested, formally, that he not be assigned to that address again under any circumstances. His supervisor granted the request without asking why, which told Marcus something in itself. In 8 years, he had never once had a request like that approved without at least a follow-up question. He found out later, through a casual conversation with someone at the credit union handling Curtis's file, a conversation he'd only started because he couldn't quite let the whole thing go, that Curtis lived alone. No family, no roommate, no one else on any lease or utility record for that address going back over a decade. No previous marriage on file, no children listed anywhere. Nothing that would explain a second person having any legitimate reason to be standing in that house at 1 a.m. Marcus asked, as carefully and casually as he could manage, who exactly had been in the upstairs window on 3 separate occasions. The credit union employee paused for a moment before answering and told him she genuinely didn't know what he was talking about. She said, as far as anyone knew, that upstairs room had been completely empty and unused since before Curtis even moved into the house, listed in an old property inspection report simply as storage space, with the electricity to that specific room disconnected years earlier for insurance and liability reasons, a fairly common practice for unused rooms in older homes like that one. Marcus asked her to double-check that. He said it mattered more than she probably realized, though he didn't explain why. She did check. She called him back 2 days later, sounding slightly less casual than she had the first time. She confirmed it. No power to that room. had not had power for at least 12 years according to the utility company's own records. The disconnection was on file, dated, with a technician's signature and everything. Marcus asked her, carefully, if there had ever been any other tenants or occupants listed for that address that she was aware of, going back further than the utility records covered. She said the credit union's file only went back to when Curtis first opened his account, about 9 years ago. Anything before that, she said, would require pulling county records, which wasn't something she had access to, or any real reason to do for a repo file. Marcus thanked her and let it go. Some part of him didn't actually want the answer, which meant, across 3 separate visits, spanning nearly 2 months, Marcus had watched a light turn on in a room that had no electricity running to it at all, and on the 3rd visit, watched someone in that unlit, powerless room wave to him like they knew exactly who he was. Theo, for his part, never took another repo assignment after that night. He put in his notice at the company less than a month later, citing vaguely unrelated reasons in his exit paperwork, and Marcus never once pushed him on whether Willow Street had anything to do with the timing of his decision. He didn't need to ask. He already knew. Story 3. The Flatbed Call. This last story comes from a woman named Priya, who drove a flatbed tow truck for a company specializing in accident recovery and larger vehicle transport. The work was physically demanding, but she liked it. She liked the mechanical precision of the job, the problem-solving involved in getting a vehicle properly secured and moved without causing further damage. She'd built a genuine reputation in the company for being good with people at accident scenes, calm and reassuring with drivers who were often shaken and frightened, still processing what had just happened to them. She had been doing this work for nearly 6 years when this happened. The call came in around 2 a.m. on a weeknight in early spring. Single vehicle accident, rural 2-lane highway, about 35 minutes outside the city. Driver reportedly uninjured but shaken, vehicle undrivable, needed transport to the nearest impound yard, pending insurance assessment. Just a standard call. She'd handled dozens just like it. Priya took the call and headed out, the drive quiet, apart from the radio, playing low, and the occasional set of headlights passing the other direction. She arrived to find exactly what she'd expected. A sedan off the road, front end into a shallow ditch, minor damage but enough to disable it. Nothing dramatic. The kind of accident that looked worse in the dark than it probably was. The driver, a man in his 30s, was sitting on the guardrail waiting for her, exactly as reported. Calm, coherent, apologetic about the inconvenience of calling her out so late. He explained he'd swerved to avoid something in the road, possibly a deer, though he admitted he hadn't gotten a clear look at it in the dark, lost control briefly, and ended up sliding into the ditch. No injuries, he said again, like he genuinely wanted to make sure she understood and believed that part. He'd already called his insurance company from the side of the road and had the claim number written down on a scrap of paper, ready to hand to her. Priya began the standard process of assessing the vehicle for the flatbed load, checking the wheels would roll, checking for fluid leaks, the routine physical inspection, before winching anything up. While she worked, the man made conversation from where he sat on the guardrail. Friendly, unremarkable small talk about the weather, about how late her shifts must run, about how he appreciated her coming out so quickly for someone he'd never met. It was ordinary conversation, the kind she'd had 100 times with stranded drivers. Nothing about the interaction stood out to her as strange, not in the moment. She got the vehicle loaded and secured within about 25 minutes, standard time for this kind of job, checking each strap twice out of habit before she considered it finished. The man thanked her, said he'd already arranged a ride from a friend who was on the way, and that he'd meet the car at the impound yard the following day to sort out the insurance paperwork. Priya offered to wait with him until his ride arrived, which was her standard practice for stranded drivers, especially late at night on an empty road like this one. It wasn't required by her job, but she did it anyway, most nights, because she didn't like the idea of leaving someone alone on a dark highway, even if they said they'd be fine. She'd grown up hearing enough stories about what could happen to a person stranded alone after midnight to make the extra few minutes feel worth it. The man declined, said his friend was only a few minutes out and that she should get going since she probably had other calls waiting. She checked her phone, no other calls pending. She told him this, more out of habit than anything else, and he just smiled and said he appreciated her concern, but he'd genuinely be fine. Something in that exchange sat slightly wrong with her, though she couldn't identify what specifically. She decided it was probably nothing and started back toward her truck. As she was climbing into the cab, Boot, already on the running board, he called out to her from where he still sat on the guardrail. Thanked her by name. She stopped completely, one foot still on the running board, the other planted on the asphalt. She had not given him her name. She was almost certain of that even in the moment, before she'd had time to fully process it. Her company polo had a name patch, small, stitched above the pocket, easily missed in low light from a distance, especially from where he'd been sitting on the guardrail the whole time. It was possible, she told herself immediately, that he'd simply read it at some point during the 25 minutes she'd been working near him, maybe while she bent over the winch controls. She looked down at herself without thinking. There wasn't a name patch. Not that night. The standard company logo patch was there instead, no name included, because her real patch had come loose the week before, and she'd been meaning to get it restitched. She stood there by her truck for a moment, running through it again in her head. She had not told him her name at any point during the call. She was certain of that. She ran through the entire interaction in her mind on the drive to the impound yard, every exchange, every piece of small talk, and there was no point where she had introduced herself. Not once, not even in passing. She called it in to dispatch anyway, more to have it documented than out of any specific action she expected them to take. Just a strange detail, a driver knowing her name when she hadn't given it, worth a note in the file even if it turned out to be nothing. Dispatch logged it without much reaction. These things happened sometimes. People made assumptions, guessed names, or she simply hadn't remembered introducing herself accurately, given how routine the interaction was and how many calls blurred together after a long shift. She tried to let it go, and mostly succeeded, until the second time it happened. 2 weeks later, on a different call entirely, a different accident, on a different stretch of road she didn't often work, a stranded driver thanked her by name again. Same situation, no name given, no visible name patch, since she still hadn't gotten it restitched, kept meaning to and kept forgetting. This time she asked him directly, keeping her voice as casual as she could manage, how he knew her name. He looked genuinely confused by the question, or at least appeared to. He said he must have seen it somewhere, maybe on the truck itself, maybe she'd mentioned it and he just remembered, the way people did with small details in stressful moments. She checked the truck that same night, walking around it slowly with her phone flashlight. No name listed anywhere on the exterior, just the company name and number, same as always. She let this one go too, eventually, telling herself that 2 coincidences over 6 years of driving thousands of calls wasn't actually that unusual, statistically. It happened a third time 4 months later. Different driver, different location, on a stretch of highway she'd never worked before. Same unprompted use of her name by someone she had never given it to, and had no visible way of knowing it. She stood there for a second after he said it, feeling the same cold drop in her stomach as the first 2 times. This time she didn't ask. She just finished the job as quickly and professionally as she could, kept her voice steady, and left the moment the vehicle was secured. She told me she has thought about this many times since, lying awake trying to find some rational pattern to hold on to. Maybe her name badge was more visible than she assumed, even without the stitched patch. Maybe she mentioned her name during these interactions without fully registering that she'd done so, the way routine conversations sometimes blurred together after enough repetition, especially deep into an overnight shift, when exhaustion softened the edges of everything. She said none of those explanations feel complete when she actually sits with the memory of each specific moment, the way each of them said her name, not casually, not like something overheard and repeated back uncertainly, the way a person sounds when they're testing a guess, confidently, like they'd known it the whole time and had simply been waiting for the right moment to use it. She told me she'd tried, more than once, lying awake some nights running through it, to find some connection between the three men. Different ages, different builds, different parts of the region entirely, different types of vehicles and different types of accidents. Nothing that linked them in any way she could identify, beyond the simple fact that all three had needed her help late at night on a quiet rural road. And all three had known something about her that they had absolutely no legitimate way of knowing. She has wondered, more than she'd like to admit, especially on the long, quiet drives back from a late call, whether it was even three different people at all, or something else entirely wearing three different faces. She still does this work. She told me she has not stopped, has not requested a transfer, has not let it change how she does her job, at least not outwardly. But she said she has started wearing her name patch again, deliberately, every single shift, without exception, not to be identified. The opposite, actually. She said if someone is going to know her name regardless of what she does or doesn't wear, she would rather it be because they could plainly see it stitched above her pocket, in the open, where anyone might read it. Then spend every single call afterward, every stranded driver, on every dark road, wondering silently how they knew. At least this way, she said, there's a simple explanation available. Even now, she's not entirely sure. She believes it herself. Subscribe for more late-night stories, a new one every week. 3 drivers, 3 routes. They've driven 1,000 times before. Dennis confirms every call twice now. Marcus never went back to Willow Street, and Priya wears her name patch again. Every shift. If something about a call doesn't sit right, trust that feeling. Some jobs already